Well, again, thank you for being here today. Over the last 6-7 months, I've gotten used to speaking in a lot of different contexts, like to just a camera in a room like this, to just a camera in my living room, to people outside with cars going by with great soundtracks going on. And I think the toughest one is to people with half their face covered because you can't see expression. So, like, you need to smile with your eyes today if you're tracking. Lots of body language, those types of things. It encourages me. I actually know that people are listening and paying attention. No, I kid, but it's an interesting time. It's an interesting time to be starting a church, which is awesome that you guys are all here, and for those joining online as well. We are starting a brand new series, and to introduce this series as a quick question, and this is not supposed to be some kind of like a weird put you on the spot shame. You can just completely back out and not be a part of the question answering here that will be asked to be demonstrated by show of hands, or you can participate if you choose to, but I don't want anybody to feel awkward about it, so I'm just throwing that out there as a caveat. The question I'm going to ask you is, who here considers themselves to be a Christian? Raise your hand. Okay, good. Who here considers themselves to be a disciple of Jesus? Raise your hand. Okay, most of you, but not everyone. A good percentage, that's pretty good. Because here's the thing. A lot of us consider ourselves Christians because that's the term that we use most commonly in our world, in our current day to talk about that. So whenever you ask a group of people, who's a Christian and then who's a disciple, there's a little pause and uneasiness and maybe hesitation about saying, yes, I'm a disciple, because it feels like that's claiming a little bit more. And I think that's a really interesting thing. And one of the interesting things about this term Christian is that it's not Jesus' term. The word Christian is used in the New Testament. It's used 3 times. 3 times in the New Testament. Whereas the word disciple, which is Jesus' chosen word for his followers, is found over 200 times in the New Testament. Acts chapter 11, verse 26 says this, says, the disciples were called Christians first at Antioch. The disciples were called Christians first at Antioch. It was actually an outsider term to name this group of people, even could be considered as making fun of them, poking fun, talking about the fact that they were small Christs. They were like little imitations of Christ, which actually is a really fitting name, and that's why I think it took. It took because the meaning behind it was good, was legitimate, and it could be reclaimed by the Christian community, by the disciples of Jesus, to say, yeah, we are small Christs. We are little pictures of Jesus in our world, and that's what we are exactly supposed to be. But I think the challenge is that we lose that particular meaning of it, and actually, the way we use it, Christian has a really broad and wide range of meaning. It's really broad, really wide. It means a lot of different things to different people. As a matter of fact, it can just mean, and has meant in recent years in our country, maybe a little bit less and less as we move forward, but it can mean that it's someone who believes in God, but who doesn't identify with another world religion. It's sort of, a lot of people have become Christians by default. We're Christians because we're not something else, but we do believe in God. And so I think there's a little bit of confusion as to what a follower of Jesus is to look like, and some of that even comes from the very word that we use to name ourselves, the way that we identify faith-wise as Christian. A disciple is inherently more descriptive than the word Christian. A disciple carries some meaning with it, right? One of the aspects of being a disciple is that you're an apprentice. You actually physically follow along, you watch, and then you put into action the things that you're doing. You're a learner. You're a follower. You're an imitator. And sometimes when we think of this word disciple, and this is why I think many times when you ask someone, are you a Christian? Yes. Are you a disciple of Jesus? Ooh, I don't know. Maybe, probably not. Is because we start to think about the 12. Like we use the term disciple about the 12 closest followers of Jesus that we read about all through the Gospels. And as we think about the disciples, that's probably the first thing that comes to our mind, the 12 disciples, and really they're the 12 apostles. And when the New Testament says disciples, most of the time it's referring to a much larger group than just the 12. So it's more than just the 12. But we are going to look at the calling of some of those 12 in Matthew chapter 4. And Jesus, it says, he's walking beside the Sea of Galilee in verse 18. As Jesus walked beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will make you fishers of men." And then it says, at once they left their nets and they followed him. I think the immediate response of these people these two guys who became Jesus' close followers was pretty amazing. At once they left their nets and followed him. Now, a lot of times we read this passage and it doesn't give a ton of context, and we're left to guess, is this the very first interaction between Jesus and these men? But as we look at the rest of the Gospels, it becomes apparent that no, this is likely not the first interaction. They've heard Jesus teaching. They've seen at least enough to know that this is someone who's worthy of following. But nevertheless, when Jesus calls them to follow him, they drop what they have and they walk after him. They let go of what they have going on in their lives and they follow after him. There's three components of Jesus' call here in this moment to these two men. There's three components. The first one is come, follow me, right? And that's ultimately what they obey. They obey this call to come follow him. And that requires setting aside the plans that you have for yourself. That's what that requires. And they were fishermen. This is their business. This is their livelihood. This is how they made their living and fed themselves and their families. And they had to release that. They had to set aside those plans that they had for themselves. I'm sure they knew what they were up to. They knew what their plan for 5 years out was going to be and what that was going to look like. But they had to set all of that aside in order to come and follow Jesus. Then the second component, he says, and I will make you. When we follow Jesus, when we are called into a disciple relationship with Jesus, we enter a process of transformation where he is turning us into something. We are in the making, and that's the title of this new series, In the Making. We enter this process of being in the making into a disciple or a follower of Jesus Christ. It's an event that happens to us, and it's a process that continues happening to us over time. The Christian faith is an event that happens to us, but also a process that carries on with us. And when we say yes to follow Jesus, we enter this process of transformation where he says, and I will make you. And then he finishes that sentence by saying, fishers of men, people who fish for other people. And what he means by that is you are going to be engaged in a mission. You're going to be deployed and sent out on a mission that I have laid out for you. You will have a role. You will have an active participation in this process of continuing to make more disciples. Come and follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Three components of this call. And as Jesus gathered groups of followers and disciples around him, and as he taught the crowds, he begins to reveal more and more about how his disciples are supposed to live and what they're supposed to look like as they go through this life. And some of these teachings are things that we repeat, that we memorize, that we post on the wall, that we love to hear, and some of them are really challenging. And today, I don't want it to be easy today. I want us to be challenged today about what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus. And we're going to spend a few minutes here in Luke chapter 14, where Jesus develops some thoughts about what it's supposed to look like to follow after him. Luke chapter 14, starting in verse 25, it says, large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and he turned to them and he said, so before we even jump into what he said, I love this, the fact that there are large crowds. And it's so interesting to see what Jesus says to large crowds versus what, as human beings, we might have the tendency to say to large crowds. When there are large crowds gathered, for me in ministry, it's like I want to keep the large crowds, you know? And Jesus seems to say things a lot of times when it says there's a large crowd that does not help him to keep the large crowds. He was not worried about impressing people. He was going to speak what was true. He was going to say things that he knew at times were going to cause people to say, do I really want to be here? And there are times where he thins the large crowds. And I think it's really interesting. He's not afraid here to say what he really wants to say. It says, he says to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. And then a few verses later, he says, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples. Man, this is a tough passage. And in fact, when we think about what Jesus calls people to, he says, if you want to be my follower, here's how you love God and love people. Here are the two greatest commandments, right? Love God, love others. Like, how does this work? If you're supposed to hate everyone, and how are you supposed to be fulfilling that commandment? Obviously, Jesus means this in a hyperbolic sense. He's making a statement that's beyond what he's really trying to say in order to make a point. I think of it like this. He kind of means it in comparison. Like for me, I love a good hot dog. I think pretty much all of us, we go to the baseball game or something like that. You love a good hot dog, right? But if you ask me, okay, that's great, you love a good hot dog. How do you feel about filet mignon? It's like, oh, forget it. I hate hot dogs. I love the filet. Like, give me that. There's a comparison. It doesn't even come close between the two. It's no contest. And I think that's ultimately what Jesus is trying to say, is in your life, even though you have people you love, people who you are close to, people who you are responsible to giving yourself to, even in comparison to them, Jesus is everything. Jesus is everything. There's no contest between him and anything or anyone else in your life. I think that's what he's trying to say with this hyperbole. That's a statement that, hey, we need to hate everyone, all the important people in our life compared to Jesus, because by comparison, there's no contest between anything or anyone else and Jesus. Are we supposed to love our families? Of course. Are we supposed to love our neighbors? He tells us to. But when it comes down to it, there's no contest in our lives between Jesus and anything else. And I think the point is we think about Christianity, we think about being Christians, and we think about what it means to be a disciple. I think at the end of the day, that Jesus does not give us the option of being merely a Christian. He doesn't give us that option of just being Christians. He wants us to be something more. I guess you could think of it like this. All squares are rectangles, right? Let me go back to geometry. All squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares, right? In the same way, all disciples are Christians, but not all Christians are disciples. And what Jesus wants is he wants us to fall into that both category. He wants us to be like a square. We are both. We are Christians and we are disciples. Saying both of those things is true of us as his followers. He calls us to something big. He calls us to something vital. And we've created some type of sort of dumbed down version of what Jesus calls us to. And we've even created some kind of dumbed down version of who Jesus is at some points. He's super nice. He's not demanding. And there are times where what he teaches is very demanding, very difficult and challenging. So that view is incomplete. That dumbed down Jesus we create is incomplete. And so is the faith that goes along with it. But Jesus calls us to something bigger. Last week we talked about this passage that ends the kind of conclusion to the Sermon on the Mount as we closed that series Upside Down. By the way, if you missed that because our live stream was not functioning last week, the internet was not cooperating with us, we posted the video later. For a while, it was a little bit harder to find on the YouTube page, so you could go back and check that out if you missed it. But he talks about this series of twos, right? And the first one is the idea of this, there are these two roads with two gates, and you need to pick the narrow road, not the wide road. And there aren't additional options. And that's what he spends that whole last half of that chapter 7 of Matthew chapter 7 in the Sermon on the Mount, developing this idea that there are two options. We can choose the narrow road, we can choose to build our house on the rock, or we choose the sand, or we choose the wide road that leads to destruction. Those are our choices. We don't have some kind of a middle pathway where we get to kind of look like everyone else and just do whatever we want to do and expect that everything is going to be okay. He calls us to something a little bit deeper than what we sometimes imagine. He calls us something a little bit deeper. When it comes to our lives, sometimes we compartmentalize and break down our lives. And like if you think about a pie chart, I actually brought an actual pie. All right, so you think about how we do these things with pie charts, and it's a way for us to compartmentalize, right? This is an apple pie. It's one of my favorites. Store-bought, though, so don't get too excited. So you've got a pie, right? And we think about our lives as like broken up into different segments. And we cut up our lives into pieces, and we say, there's a lot of different parts of me. Maybe I'll give a big piece to like my work life, because that takes a lot of time during the week. So maybe like this is my work life, but that's not the most important part of me. There are a lot of other parts. So here's like my family life, who I am as a husband and a father, and my friendships and my relationship to my siblings and parents and things like that over here. Here's maybe my hobby area. And then what we think of as we go through our lives is we also have a spot reserved for Jesus. Like we have a spot reserved for our faith. And that's one of these slices of pie. And we give him that whole piece of pie. And we're like, that is what this is about. That is what following Jesus is about. We're going to give him a segment, a part of our lives. And Jesus basically says, no, I don't want that. I don't want just a piece of your life. And I think that's what we get mixed up with a lot of times. We're like, as Christians, Jesus is a piece. We give him a piece. That's our church piece. That's like our prayer before meals or bedtime thing. That's our teaching the children Bible stories here and there. That's occasional times where we listen to worship songs, or we might read our Bible every once in a while. For people, it varies, right? For some people, that's like Christmas morning and Easter Sunday, Like there's certain times that we give to Jesus. For other people, it's a lot more. It's like he has a huge piece. And we spend time in his word, and we spend time in prayer, and we go to our life group, and we go to church, and we volunteer in 4 different things during the week, and we're doing all this stuff, and Jesus has this huge piece of our lives. But sometimes we still, even if he's got a big piece, we sometimes still think of it in that way, where it's a segment, it's a part of our lives, and there are other parts of our lives. And I think what Jesus wants to say is that at the end of the day, it's not about giving him a piece. It's about making him the filling, because we are going to have components to our lives. We are going to have a home life. We are going to have a work life. We're going to have our hobbies. We're going to have our relationships and friendships. We are going to have all these different parts of our lives. And what Jesus is saying to us is, I want to be a piece. I want to be the center of all of it. I want to be the thing that makes it what it is. Like this is an apple pie because the filling is made out of apples. That's what this is. And it takes every part. It takes the personal life part, it takes the hobbies part, it takes the work life, it takes all of the parts. And it's the center of each of those parts. And that is what Jesus wants to be in our lives. He doesn't want to be a piece. He doesn't even want to be like 3/4 of it. He wants to be the filling. He wants to be over everything. He wants to be the middle, the center of everything, not to be given a segment. And we know this because of how he challenges his followers to chase after him. How he says, you have to give up everything that you have to be my follower. Now, does that mean we all have to do exactly what those first 2 apostles did when he says, hey, come follow me, and they drop their livelihood and they walk after him? No, not all of us. Maybe sometimes. Maybe sometimes if God calls, are you willing to drop everything, including your livelihood, to follow after him? Are you willing to make those types of sacrifices? That's a huge question, but he might not call you to do that. He's more likely going to call you to allow him to be the filling in that part of your life, and to take him to your workplace. He's more likely to ask you to take him into your livelihood and have you impact all of it. But our willingness needs to be the same as what their willingness was, to drop everything to follow him, because he's everything. He's the center. He's the centerpiece. Jesus calls us to that. In the book of Revelation, Jesus is walking around and he's evaluating the churches. And this is all a part of John's vision in the book of Revelation. And he's evaluating the churches that were around at that time. And to one church, the church at Laodicea, he says this in Revelation chapter 3, verse 15 and 16. He says, I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either one or the other. Have you ever had like lukewarm coffee? I mean, if you're a coffee drinker, I know you have. You've accidentally let your coffee cool, and you're like, I'm sure it'll be fine. You take that last sip, and you're like, it's not fine. Like iced coffee can be good. Hot coffee is good. I'm a big temperature person when it comes to food and drinks. Like I want my I don't drink pop anymore, but my bubbly water on like ice cold, I want water to be cold. I want coffee to be hot. And if it's not, then there's something off. Like room temperature water, some people do. I don't really do that. But when it comes to room temperature coffee, like that's gross. There have been times where I really regret that, and even we're to the point where I'm like, okay, we're putting that back, just to be honest. Because that's exactly what Jesus said. Because you are lukewarm, like that coffee that I had yesterday, neither hot nor cold, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. And the word here really for spit, like is the same word for vomit. Like he's like, it makes me sick. When we come to him with this sort of lukewarm, wishy-washy, halfway in type of following, he's like, I don't want that. I don't want that. That makes me sick. That's not what I've called you to. We have this saying, this thought in our culture, everything in moderation, right? It applies to this, pie, right? It applies to sweets and food with high in calories. Like, oh yeah, you can have it, but everything in moderation, right? Everything in moderation. Unhealthy food, TV, bad habits, things like that. Everything in moderation. As long as you don't let it take over, it's okay. And we often apply this principle inadvertently to our faith. Everything in moderation. Everything has its place. Everything has its segment. Jesus does not like that principle as it applies to our relationship with him. He says not everything in moderation. This is something, this affects everything. This takes over everything. This does the opposite of what that principle encourages. And sometimes I wonder, and I think about this, I was having a conversation with someone this week, if a first century Palestinian who watched the birth of the church occur were to just somehow magically show up right here and follow us around and watch our services and watch the way we live and see our day-to-day, and they didn't understand our culture, they don't understand our buildings, they don't understand our language, like they don't understand any of that, but they were to watch us, and they were to watch Christians in the United States and not really know what was going on, would they even recognize us as followers of Jesus? And that's a convicting question for me. That's a convicting question. How do we look different? How do we represent Jesus the way that his followers in the first century who helped in the birth of the church represent Jesus? Would they recognize us? I think there's a few dangers, and we've touched on a couple of them. One is that we can become Christians by default, right? We can become Christians because we believe in God, but we're not something else. Another one is moderation with our faith, like we just said. And then another one is consumer Christianity. We take sort of our approach to all of life as Americans and we apply it to faith as well, where it becomes some sort of exchange. What can we get from God? And we're in it as long as it pays to be in it, as long as there's a payback to us to be in it. And when that stops and when it's inconvenient, then a lot of times we turn off with that as well. Those are some of the dangers for us as American Christians, I think, that are threatening us. The Christianity by default, the moderation applied to faith, and the idea of consumer Christianity. What is in it for me? And what I'm getting at with this, and what we will be getting at with this series, is that we need to reclaim what Jesus actually called us to be. We need to reclaim what Jesus actually called us to be as his followers. It's a big call. It's a big call, but it's the call that's worth it. In Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through to 30, Jesus says this, and this is tough because this is one of those passages we love, right? And it sort of seems to conflict a little bit with the passage we looked at before out of Luke 14. He says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." That's an awesome passage. It's also straight from the lips of Jesus. It's the same one who said, if you don't give up everything, you can't be my disciples. How does this work? How do these two things work together? That there's a yoke that is easy and a burden that is light, but yet we have to give up all that we are, all that we have, to be his followers. To me, it's because this is what we were made for. We were made for a relationship and a faith in Jesus that was all-encompassing. We were made to walk with him in such a way that it affects every piece of our lives, that it wasn't just a segment. And when we do that, when we figure out how to take that step to surrender and to let go, and we say that it is yours, you can have it all, then what we end up doing is we realize that this is easy, this is a light burden, because this is what I was actually made for. And it's the same thing as we relate this to the world, because what we give to them, what we offer to them, when we show them partial Christianity, kind of halfway in, lukewarm Christianity, is we show them something that instead of being compelling, it's weak. And we show them something that no one else really wants a part of, because it doesn't lead to actual true transformation. We were made for all-in faith. We were made not to be lukewarm. And I think it seemed in our country to us, and for some of us this is really alarming, it has seemed in our country over the last several years that Christianity is beginning to lose ground. We're beginning to lose ground in our country, and we're seeing this, and a lot of times it's alarming. Like, we see that it's not the default as much as it was anymore, right? Like, it used to be that everyone considered themselves a Christian unless they considered themselves another specific faith. But that's not the case anymore. There's a growing number of people who identify as spiritually or religiously as none. I don't identify as anything. There's a growing, they call it the nuns. There's this growing group of nuns that is happening, not nuns, N-U-N-S, but N-O-N-E-S. They have none in terms of their faith affiliation. And we see that and we can be alarmed. And quite frankly, I've been there myself as I've looked at some of that. But here's the positive. Christianity will no longer be the default. It will no longer be a faith of moderation, and probably not consumerist either, because it won't serve us so well. It won't serve people so well as a social, cultural capital type of thing. And therefore, as followers of Jesus, we'll start presenting, we'll have to choose, first of all, if we're going to continue to be followers of Jesus. But if we choose to, we will stop presenting a watered-down, weakened version of the faith. And instead, we'll present the all-in, not lukewarm, but completely all-in, red-hot faith that Jesus wanted from us to begin with, that we are on fire for him. And we will be what Jesus actually called us to be. And then our testimony to the world will be compelling. As compelling as the first century Christians were, who attracted thousands of people and created a movement that has brought us to today. That's the positive. If we want to look at the bright side, we're going to let Jesus work in this time. And sometimes I think it can be to our detriment that the faith felt like it had power, that it had this momentum and that it had ground to stand on, because that's not how it started in the beginning either, right? That's not how it began when Jesus launched the church. And so there is something that God could be doing in and through us during this time period, even if it seems discouraging at times, as I've been discouraged at times. In Matthew 13, and this is our last passage we're going to look at, Jesus teaches a parable in verse 44 through 46. Two parables, actually, just two quick ones. He says, "The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went, and he sold all he had, and he bought that field." He goes on, "Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it." This is what Jesus is talking about in Luke 14 when he says, if you don't give up everything you have, you can't be my disciple. But this person, this man who's searching for a treasure, for a pearl of great value, when he finds it, he sells everything in order to buy that treasure, to buy that pearl. Why would he do that? Because as he looks at that thing, as he looks at that treasure, he looks at that pearl, he knows ultimately that sacrifice is worth it. It's worth it. And that's the thought about being a disciple. Being a disciple is worth it. We have found something of infinitely more value than a great treasure or a pearl of great value. We have found something infinitely more valuable than that, and is worthy of our lives. It's worthy of us giving up everything that we have to be his disciple. And when we do that, we find that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. It's worth it. It's worth it to do what he calls us to do. Remember, it's not just about what we can get from him, and we think about it being worth it. We have to make sure we don't go into that mindset. It's not what we can get from him, because sometimes the being worth it is not even something we'll realize fully in this life. I believe we will begin to realize it in this life as we begin to live with purpose and with mission and with him by our side, but it's something that we won't fully realize in this life. We will make sacrifices, and we won't always see how it was worth it. But at some point, someday, we will realize it was worth it. It was worth it to give everything up to follow him. So, we will continue to investigate in the coming weeks what it looks like to be a disciple of Jesus. And my challenge for you this week is to begin to evaluate in every area of your life, is he the center? Is he the center? Am I giving him a piece? Or is he the center? How is he the center of my work life? How is he the center of my family life, of my friendships, my relationships, my hobbies? How is he the center of these areas? Are you following him at work, at home, with your free time? Invite him in. Pray a simple prayer. Jesus, today, I invite you to be the center. Pray that prayer every morning. Evaluate in your life at the end of the day, how have I done at making him the center as you follow Jesus in a way that he calls us to follow him? Let's pray. We're going to close with a song, just offering him, Jesus, you can have it all in my heart, in my life right now. God, we thank you. We thank you for sending Jesus. We thank you for the example that he gives to us. Jesus, we thank you for giving your life on the cross for our sins. We thank you that you want to have a relationship with us. We thank you that your yoke is easy, your burden is light. We thank you that you created us for more. Lord, it's hard to give you everything. It's hard to say you can have it all. Lord, we want to sing this and we want to mean it with our hearts. And we want to invite you to take every part of our lives, to be the center of our lives, to have it all, Lord. Would you take it? Help us to follow you in every area. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
I invite you guys to stand if you want. Otherwise, you can just sing. You can have it all, Lord. Every part of my world. Take this life and breathe on this heart that is now yours. You can have it all, Lord. Every part of my world. Take this life and breathe on this heart that is now yours. Oh, the joy. And oh, the joy I found surrendering my crown at the feet of the King who surrendered everything. And oh, the joy that comes when I'm broken and undone by your unfailing grace. I can lift my voice and sing. Oh, you can have it all, Lord. Every part of my world. Take this life and breathe on this heart that is now yours. You can have it all. You can have it all, Lord. Every part of my world. Take we praise you for who you are, for what you've done for us, Lord. Thank you that we can trust in your unfailing love, Lord. That you never fail. You are always good. Sing this out. There is no greater. There is no greater call than giving you my all. I lay it all down. I lay it all down. There is no greater love, no higher name above. I lay it all down. I lay it all down. There is no greater love, no higher name above. I lay it all down. I lay it all down. There is no greater love, no higher name above. I lay it all down. I lay it all down. That's how you can have it all. Oh, you can have it all, Lord. Every part of my world. Take this life and breathe on. This heart that is mine. You can have it all. Oh, you can have it all, Lord. Every part of my world. Take this life and breathe on. This heart that is mine. Sing that out. You can have it all, Lord. Every part of my world. Take this life and breathe on. This heart that is now yours.
A few quick announcements before we walk out. You can just stay standing. I'll make it fast. First of all, we've got these little forms. It tells you how to download an app called the Church Center app. If you're savvy, you'll be able to do it with that one even. You just search Church Center app on your whatever you have, whether it's iPhone, App Store, or Android. You can search that. You can download it. It gives you quick links to our website. It helps you to register when we get kids ministry back up and going at some point in time. You could pre-register kids and stuff on the way in. If we have events, you can register for those there. You can do your giving online through the Church Center app. It's really handy, and we'd encourage you to download it, and then you just have to select Oak Point, Canton as your home church in order to access all of that through us. Speaking of kids, as I mentioned, the pre-registration aspect, for those online or in the room, whatever, if you've got kids, they are so welcome at our services until we do get our kids ministry up and running. We do have packets that our lovely kids director, Becky, has been making for our kids each and every week. And so they'll have a packet that my kids are always excited to get it, to color it, to do the little games and stuff like that. And so make sure you come and grab those, and do not worry about any kind of noise or anything like that. We're going to make this family church for a while, as long as we need to. Of course, that's true for the 9 inside and the 11 o'clock service outside. Also, speaking of older kids, youth, we have been kind of just leaning into what we have at our sister church, Oak Point Church in Novi, for some time, and we're going to continue to do that. But I want to introduce someone to you right now by the name of Zeke Lipsy. Zeke is walking up right now. Zeke has been an intern at Oak Point Church Novi. Come on up, Zeke. He's been an intern at Oak Point Church Novi for 3 years?
3 years, yeah.
And he's been serving in the student ministry there. He grew up through the student ministry there. And he's going to come over on loan from Novi to help us launch Oak Point Canton student ministry activities, along with several volunteers here. And so he's going to be leading that charge. I wanted to introduce Zeke to you this morning so you know him, and we'll be seeing him around as he does that and even other stuff around here in ministry. Zeke, you're going to share a little bit about students and what you have planned
That's right.
here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be a part of what God's doing here at Oak Point Canton. I can't wait. But yeah, like Mark said, I just want to share a quick couple announcements of what we've been planning over this last month. And so really our goal over the next 3 to 4 months is to have like 3 to 4 kind of events, like monthly gatherings for junior high kids and high school students. And so the purpose for these events is to really build community among the Canton students and just the new Canton youth leadership. And the other purpose is just to start to form this sense of identity for Oak Point Canton youth ministry, right? Because eventually we want to split off from our Milford campus and our Novi campus. So this is kind of like the really, really early stages of building that identity for Canton's youth ministry. And so actually, in fact, our first event is going to be this month, September 27th. And so if you have students, junior high or high school, they're more than welcome to attend this event. Again, September 27th. The name of the event is a Grill Out and Chill Out, and it's exactly what it sounds like. We're just going to grill out some hot dogs and hamburgers and hang out and play some games, some socially distanced games. And so September 27th, 4 to 6, it's going to be here in Canton, just a couple miles down.
Ridge Road there.
Yeah, Cherry Hill Road. I'm not too familiar with Canton yet, so. Anyways, 2 miles down Cherry Hill Road south in the Hamlet neighborhood at the Hamlin Common Area Center. But we'll send some more information out about it if you didn't catch all of that. And also next week, September 20th, there's going to be a parent meeting regarding this event and just some of the future plans that we have down the road for Canton's youth ministry. So again, next week, September 20th, a parent meeting, and I hope to see all you guys there, whatever parents want to join. So yeah.
See, the parent meeting will be what, right after service?
Yes, right after first and second service.
Awesome, perfect.
Yep.
Great. And Cherry Hill runs east and west. I said Ridge. It's Ridge, Southtown. You'll learn.
Yeah, I'll learn. Thanks for embarrassing, Mark.
I just got to give you a hard time. Yeah, the Hamlet neighborhood, the clubhouse, commons area, they'll be outside, so it'll be an awesome event. So we're super excited to have Zeke here, working with students and getting that rolling. As we continue to meet, whether it's the 9 or the 11, as you get to come out, probably should have guys had you sit down after service was over, sorry. You're like, I'm still standing. Get your exercise in. We do want to encourage you to save a seat that you're not allowed to sit in right now. Save a seat for each service, just because even if you're coming to the outdoor service, we might have to pivot inside, and we want to make sure that we're obeying the protocols that we have here with the township, and we can have a chance to recover and make that happen when we know who's coming. So if you would save a seat, that would be awesome. On your way out, we do have buckets available if you prefer to give in person. Otherwise, giving online is always available. We thank you so much for your generosity. If you're new, please just take this service as our gift. We do not want you to ever feel obligated to give. Also, if you're new, we would love to meet you. We would love to meet you out in the atrium on the way out or outside the front doors, get your information so we can help you get plugged in. Even if you've been coming for a while, you want to get more plugged in on what we're doing here at Oak Point Canton. We would love to get you set up with getting the day started or volunteering in some certain area, whatever it might be. For both of those, whether you're new or been around, you want more information on anything, always feel free to email us, canton@oakpoint.org. So that's if you miss us today or don't get a chance to talk, then that would be totally fine as well. If you have students or if you don't, meet Zeke. Say hi to him. He'll be milling around as well, and we're going to be doing that milling around outdoors. Thank you guys so much for being here. We hope to see you again next week. Have a good one.